Welcome to the Explainer. So, we're diving straight into a pretty wild question today. Are the vivid pictures you conjure up in your head processed by the exact same neural hardware as the stuff you see with your actual eyes? It's one of the most profound mysteries of human experience, the line between reality and imagination. Let's unpack some groundbreaking fMRI research that finally gives us the answer.
Now, this isn't exactly a new debate. Way back, before fMRI scanners were even a blip on the radar, Plato actually called mental imagery a mental artist painting pictures in the soul. Beautiful, right? But for centuries, philosophers have basically just been debating this. Does the mind's eye use the same canvas and paint as physical sight? Well, today, we actually have the hard neuroimaging data to see if Plato's poetic description holds up.
To crack this case, researchers from Harvard University put together a ridiculously clever fMRI experiment. They didn't just shove people in a scanner and say, hey, daydream for a bit. No, they used highly specific stimuli. Imagine a faint, low-contrast drawing of a tree. We're talking intentionally kept to just 15% contrast so it wouldn't totally overwhelm the visual cortex. Then, participants were either asked to stare directly at these faint drawings on a screen or close their eyes and try to visualize the exact same drawings from memory. To fully appreciate how smart this study is, let's walk through the exact steps the participants followed. Think of it as a highly focused cognitive game. Step 1, you hear the name of an object through headphones. Let's say, tree. Step 2, depending on the round, you either visualize that tree with your eyes closed or you physically look at the drawing. Step 3, after waiting 4.5 seconds, you hear a probe, a single letter, like W for wider than tall. And finally, step 4, you have to make a spatial judgment and press a button if the object was in fact wider than it was tall.
The sheer genius here is the perfect symmetry. Notice how the two tasks are completely equated. Whether a participant was actively looking or just imagining, they heard the exact same audio cues, waited the exact same amount of time, made the exact same spatial judgments, and pushed the exact same buttons. This is absolutely crucial because it rules out any brain activity differences caused by simply moving a hand or hearing a sound. Literally, the only true variable left on the table was the source of the image, physical reality versus mental imagination.
Real quick, before we drop the results, let's do a tiny terminology check. Researchers measure fMRI brain activation in voxels. Basically, think of a voxel as a 3D pixel of brain data, with each one representing millions of neurons. Counting these little guys allowed the team to precisely map out exactly where the brain activity overlapped. All right, the primary finding here is honestly staggering. When researchers compared the active voxels across the entire brain during both visual perception and mental imagery, they found a massive 92% overlap. 92%. That means the vast majority of the neural machinery you use to navigate the physical world is literally hijacked by your brain to construct your internal, imaginary world. So, neurologically speaking, Plato's mental artist is almost identical to the physical observer. But wait, how does this actually break down across different regions of the brain? Because while 92% is a massive number, the overlap isn't spread evenly. The brain isn't doing one big monolithic task. We see complete overlap up at the top and front of the brain, the frontal and parietal cortices, but only a partial overlap in the occipital and temporal regions at the back and sides. That little discrepancy is our next major clue, prompting us to take a quick anatomical tour to figure out what's hiding in that missing 8% difference. Let's start right at the front. The frontal and parietal regions showed a flawless 100% overlap. Every single voxel activated by looking at an image was also activated by imagining it. You can think of these areas as the project managers of your mind. They're your cognitive control and spatial attention centers. Whether you're actively evaluating a physical drawing of a tree or carefully retrieving that tree from your memory to inspect its branches, your brain requires the exact same executive focus and spatial mapping. Now, contrast that perfect match with the occipital lobe, hanging out at the very back of your head. This is the primary visual processing center of the brain. And here, the researchers found only about a 26% overlap in activation. Turns out the occipital cortex was generally way more active, and its activation was much more widespread when participants were actually looking at the faint images on the screen compared to when they were just visualizing them with their eyes closed. Which brilliantly illustrates the fundamental difference between sensory input and memory retrieval. See, when you're perceiving reality, your visual cortex has to work incredibly hard. It has to process raw physical light, group shapes together, separate the tree from the background, and categorize the whole shebang in milliseconds. But when you create a mental image, you don't need to do all that heavy lifting.
You already know what the object is because you're the one visualizing it. You totally bypass those initial intensive perceptual operations designed for object detection. So this discrepancy basically solves the mystery of why imagination isn't completely identical to reality, even with a 92% overlap. The executive planning and spatial attention, handled by the frontal and parietal lobes, are identical, but the raw sensory processing in the occipital lobe is vastly different. The brain areas engaged by visual imagery are essentially just a subset of those engaged during visual perception. Imagery is a lot like perception, just stripped of the heavy sensory processing. And it gets even cooler. The researchers actually found differences in the precise timing of the brain's reactions. In the imagery condition, the blood flow in the visual areas showed a single, smooth peak of activity. But during actual perception, the time course showed a double peak. That second burst of brain activity was likely triggered by the visual transient of the physical stimulus physically disappearing from the screen. Your brain reacts not just to the presence of physical reality, but to its sudden absence, a sudden shift in reality that simply doesn't happen when a mental image naturally fades from your mind's eye.
Now, to really lock in how those identical frontal lobes operate during both tasks, let's look at an unexpected but perfect parallel: the CDC's principles for writing clear audio scripts. Stick with me here. Think of these guidelines: organizing ideas, conveying content, building quality, and cutting production time, not just as writing rules, but as the exact executive blueprint your frontal lobe uses to manage your reality. Right, so just as a good scriptwriter meticulously organizes ideas, your frontal lobe acts as the executive producer of your consciousness. Whether it's managing the unpredictable raw data of physical perception or directing the memory retrieval required for imagination, the frontal lobe runs the exact same script. It allocates resources, directs your spatial attention, and structures your cognitive output. It's the master writer of your conscious experience, completely regardless of whether the input is coming from your eyes or your memories.
Which brings us to a really mind-bending conclusion. If 92% of the neural machinery used to see the world is the exact same machinery used to imagine it, and the executive control centers are absolutely identical, it really blurs the line between the external world and our internal landscape. So I'll leave you with this to ponder. How much of what you consider your daily objective reality is actually just a highly organized mental script, continuously generated and painted into your soul by the incredible machinery of your own mind's eye? Thanks for joining me on this explainer. Keep questioning what you see.